There'll be an author live on the programme shortly, the author behind the book, Let the Souls of Our Children Sing. We're talking about bullying today. It is Anti-Bullying Week. Dealing with and expressing your emotions is something that takes practice. It's not easy. And even with age, we still hit a few learning curves along the way. It's something that author Leonora Langley looks at in her new book, Let the Souls of Our Children Sing. She gives a voice to the feelings children have and explores the hurt and confusion that bullied children can experience, something that can be very difficult for them to process. Thank you for joining us, and good afternoon, Leonora. Tell us, what effects do you think bullying has on children?
It's absolutely widespread form of distress that all our children are exposed to, Jenny. We all know that just like within society, classrooms are full of sarcasm, teasing and bantering at someone else's expense. That's sort of a given in our society. It's a sad given, but that's how it is. And since it has become almost a common means of communication, most of it shrugged off as inconsequential. But of course it isn't. I think constant taunting is bullying. And if it's not nipped in the bud, it can lead to victims underachieving academically. They play truant from school, running away from home, depression, eating disorders, self-harming, and even suicide. So it's so powerful, it's so endemic. Of course, on a much wider scale, we can see that racial tension is also a form of bullying. So it's sort of the macrocosm and the microcosm of life. It's utterly endemic. But of course, in the last few years, we've seen a huge increase in the frequency and severity of bullying as a direct result of the rise in social media, behind which bullies can operate in relative anonymity.
What would you say to people who are listening to this that might be thinking, oh, we always called each other names in the playground. It's just teasing. It's just fun.
Well, unfortunately, we've reached a kind of tolerance level, which is really unacceptable. Instead of acknowledging bullying as a totally unacceptable form of behaviour, many adults, including some teachers, argue that it's part of human nature and that kids have to learn to deal with it as part of growing up. That's really sad, I think, because none of it could really be categorised as a criminal offence, Jenny. But the fact that it involves the use of aggression with the intent of hurting another person, I feel it has to be regarded as abhorrent and very unkind behaviour.
Yes, and I think if we're going to say that positive talk to children is something that can lead to confidence, good school grades, etc., being supportive of children, nurturing them, surely we can say that the opposite of that would have the opposite effect.
Of course. I've always believed, Jenny, that there were going to be a percentage of children at school who cannot access academia because they're suffering from a broken heart or wounded spirit that is nurtured in the home. In my experience as a teacher and counsellor, bullying is a symptom of emotional distress, certainly on the part of the bully and sometimes even on the part of the victim too. So for both parties, for me, it can be a subconscious cry for help.
Tell me about your book and how you approach bullying.
Well, I've devoted 6 pages to it, Jenny, because I think it's such an important subject. I talk about there seem to be several common characteristics that produce and typify bullies, and most of it does stem from family dynamics rather than social or economic considerations. Bullies are often bullied themselves at home and raised in a family which uses intimidation and sometimes violence as a means of control, and they're not allowed to express their feelings and emotions safely. So as a result, a lot of children develop an internal inner critic, which has the potential to be the biggest bully of them all. We all have an internal inner critic that checks us when it's like a conscience almost, but some is so overdeveloped that it becomes overriding in children's lives. I talk about how the bully and the victims, the relationship between them can be an outlet for the suppressed and repressed feelings around the suffering and torment they may be experiencing at home. So automatically they act it out. They act out the relationship they have with their parents, where they may have learnt to equate abusive attention with love. So consequently, there are some victims who seem to enjoy the attention bullying can bring them, albeit negative, and others who switch from being bullies to victims and vice versa, as if they're trying to experience and understand both sides of the equation.
It's absolutely heartbreaking, and you can see how these patterns form and how then there's a vicious cycle within families, for example, of replaying this out with the next generation. Do you think parents and carers are aware enough of children's emotional responses?
Of course, I don't, having written a book like this, Jenny. There are going to be a high percentage who do care, who truly do care. But unfortunately, it's not really a high priority. I think that emotional well-being is at the root of all learning. Children learn not just by what they think about something, but also how they feel about it. And I feel so strongly about that. So, because parents sometimes find it difficult to raise children because they may have had quite a challenging childhood themselves, I think that schools now have to support children who are being bullied more than ever. So in school, bullies often suffer from low self-esteem and self-hatred, and then they compensate for this by being in charge and control of a gang. So behind a mask of self-confidence as a means of self-control, they have this need to be bigger, stronger, and more powerful than they actually feel inside. And I think that bullies are often quite unconscious of the reasons for their need to inflict pain on others, because it's a shadow part of their being. It's an outlet for their suffering, and their victims can be a scapegoat who replaces the real perpetrator of their suffering, on whom they cannot seek revenge without dire consequences.
And finally, Leonora, how would you recommend helping children through the experience of bullying? Apart from sitting down and reading your book, that's got to go some way in sort of educating, I think.
Well, I honestly feel, again, getting back to schools, there's an increasing awareness of the need to offer specific lessons on the dynamics of bullying and nurturing children values such as tolerance and respect for each other. We need to celebrate diversity, as well as provide emotional support for both bullies and victims. The bullies also need help. They cannot be ignored because it's not their fault. If it's nurtured in very early childhood, then we also need to help the bullies as much as the victims. Of course, you feel enormous sympathy for the victims, but equally, we need to help the bullies.
Yes, Leonora Langley, thank you. Author of the book, Let the Souls of Our Children Sing. She's also a counsellor. She's dedicated a section of her book to bullying because she feels so passionately that children need to be supported, and that's children on both sides of the bullying as well. Really interesting. Heartbreaking, actually, to think of children suffering at school or home because of bullying. And when you think of the repercussions later in life, if these things aren't dealt with properly, how it can affect a lifetime of learning and career, it's all the more sad.